Friends, we cannot ignore the traumatic effects of racism in our country, our communities, and in our lives. At the Allender Center, we believe the process of writing and sharing our stories can be an incredible form of healing. This March, the Allender Center is honored to open our story workshop for racial trauma and healing to the public for the first time. This profound event that invites you deeply into the themes of your life, particularly as a Black, Indigenous, and/or person of color, experiencing collective and personal stories of trauma living within dominant cultural norms. This 3-day workshop will be offered March 4th through 6th, 2022, in a live, interactive, online format led by our BIPOC Allender Center facilitators and teachers. Please note that we will be asking questions about racial identity in the screening process. If you or someone you know is interested in being a part of this powerful experience, please submit your application for the Story Workshop for Racial Trauma and Healing at theallendercenter.org/workshops.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, I have the great privilege of being with my delightful co-author, Cathy Loerzel, and we're going to sneakily try to advance the sales of our book. But because neither of us are, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm not that good of a promoter of the book. The real joy we get, even though we're going to talk about redeeming heartache, is we get to talk with a dear friend of ours, Cary Umhau, about her life. And because she's in the book, she's very much in the book, we want to interact with her about her life and about how she has utilized redeeming heartache as part of her reflection of her own sense of self and calling. So how would you name what we're doing, Cathy?
Oh, I mean, this is just an excuse for me to get to talk to Carrie. So more than anything, Carrie, you and I have known each other for, a long time.
Yeah,
I think you were one of the first, 14 years. So just really grateful. You've been just a dear friend and connection point for the Allender Center from before its inception. And so this is just a really fun way to bring you back in kind of full circle. So grateful for you.
I'm excited to be with y'all.
And let's just say, Carrie, there are so many words to use with regard to your existence, but I'll just say that you are a author of a book that I endorsed and loved, Burning Down the Fireproof Hotel, which, again, is such a hilarious title. Burning Down the Fireproof Hotel. But I love as well the subtitle, and that is An Invitation to the Beautiful Life. So as a woman who has told much of her own story, who has reflected on the reality of the gospel in a deeply broken and traumatized world, you're an activist, you're a woman who has lived well in what I'll call a strange word, but let me use it, high society, and in so often its counterpart. And that is, you have worked well and long with folks who are homeless. So you're an odd woman, and I don't think there's any greater gift I can give to anyone than to say both beautiful and odd. So, Carrie, anything else you want to say about yourself as we introduce you to our audience?
Well, I'll start with the acceptance of oddness and how this book put a lot of language to that. So I accept odd as a compliment and a gift and a curse all at once. So no, that's all I'd say to start that.
Well, I also say that you have a equally delightful and odd husband who happens to be a physician. I don't know all your children, but I know one in particular, and she is just a stunning human being, and I'm not questioning that the others are not. So why don't you just, in one sense, fill out something of your world on behalf of our audience?
Well, I'm on the East Coast and have grown up here. Grew up in Atlanta, live in Washington, D.C. I do have 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren, and just so much fun with them. I am Golly to them, a name I chose myself based on a character in the book Harriet the Spy. And Golly was an older woman who cared for Harriet as a caretaker and exposed her to a world she would not have otherwise known. And I thought, what more fun as a grandparent to know that you'll get to take them places, expose them to things that their parents won't, just because we're all different. So that's the delight of my life. I am a huge road tripper. Drive a Mini Cooper 6-speed and go all over the place as often as I can. Go to New York as much as I can. I'm a musical theater geek. I do teach in a homeless shelter. I have been involved in various ways of bringing people together who wouldn't normally meet each other, often by doing things they wouldn't normally have done.
And tell me, Carrie, how did we all first meet? How did you become involved with the Allender Center?
Oh my goodness. I got on your mailing list after hearing Dan speak in Northern Virginia one time at a large gathering. I got something in the mail and had this just one of those feelings. I have to attend this. It was something you all used to do, the Leadership Crucible. And I said out loud 2 or 3 times to my husband, I have to go to this. And he didn't really respond in any way that seemed satisfactory to me. What I wanted him to say was, of course, we will finance that immediately. I will take charge of what you want to do in the world and ensure that it happens. And what it turned out, he was very blasé because he had, in fact, immediately called the school and booked me into that and gotten me a ticket to Seattle and a hotel.
Sneaky man.
Sneaky man. And the effect that work of that very creative, highly unusual event had on my life, I said, there is something about this place. I have to keep coming back. And came back 6 months later to one of your story workshops. And as Cathy said, pre-Allender Center, I was just coming to, what was at that time, Mars Hill Graduate School before you were in the Seattle School. And came to one of you and said to someone on your staff and said, there's something about this institution that I am meant to be a part of. I don't know what that means, but if you ever need an East Coast person or a DC rep, or maybe I'll just keep coming. And so I did.
Mm-hmm.
What a sweet gift. Again, I know of many multiple conversations that we've had. And I think that's part of where I want to go. You are a tripper. You're a traveler. There is something peripatetic about you, meaning not just do you like to travel, but you like to be in multiple different places. Now, you don't have the virtue of God of having that omnipresence, so you can't have simultaneity in all places, but there is a sense in which you traverse terrain in ways that not a lot of people do. So I'm assuming you would pretty much agree with that.
Oh, gosh, that's my most exciting, fun thing in the world, is to wander and not know where I'm going to end up and have no idea who I'm going to encounter. And my car is set up so that it's like a mobile unit where I can stop in response to things that I see along the way. So I have equipment if I see somebody that needs something, gloves, food, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. So I'll go back to these 2 words, beautiful and odd. How is it that you came to be a peripatetic, spirit-led, I will get into trouble and see what comes of redemption human being?
Well, I was a fireproof hotel that needed burning down. So on an actual road trip, I ran across an actual fireproof building and studied it and thought about it. And it was in Wheeling, West Virginia. And I hadn't been planning to go there. I just felt the call to go off the road. And I drove and drove and drove until I saw what I was indeed led to by the Holy Spirit, and came to see that I was constructing my life to make sure everything was kept out, just to be safe. And naturally, when you're keeping out things you don't want, you're keeping out things that you probably would want if you knew what was good for you. So God answered the prayers I didn't actually pray, or the ones that I would have prayed if I'd prayed right, and sent me all kinds of people to mess with me, people that I didn't expect. And as you did say, I was raised in a privileged environment, and I was raised in Atlanta and went to the same high school as the children of Martin Luther King at a different time than me, and didn't know that there was a racial problem in my heart and my home and my country. Had no idea. And so the more that I was encountering people that were really, really different than me, the more it messed with me. And the more I got in touch with my own lack of being at home anywhere, the more I developed a passion to be sure that everybody feels a welcome somewhere.
And that metaphor of the home that can't be burnt down, the question of how did you see it burnt? How did you see it go into flames in a way that's actually given life?
Defenses broken down, becoming a person of tears, becoming a person who is very often drawn into or finds myself in situations of trauma and grief and distress, and pushes into those places. I was just wrecked. I was wrecked through every kind of relationship. I laughed one time. My husband sent me flowers, and he called the florist in his way, which is very few words sometimes. He told them to say, "Thank you for marrying me." And the florist wrote, "Thank you for marring me," and left out the why. So when the flowers arrived, I thought, yeah, even marriage, or especially marriage, we have marred one another. So I kept that card at the forefront, way in front of all the ones that said sweet sentiments, because it was more true. So just allowing myself. How do you allow yourself to be wrecked or not wrecked? I had cancer at a young age, breast cancer, and I've been thinking about the word reconstruction a lot lately, because I was reconstructed, and false Edens. That was a phrase that you used in the book that I really appreciated, and saw for myself, places where I would demand Eden, but then where I would fit into a false Eden, get a lot of praise for doing something and look good enough on the surface that it kept me going for a while. But God in his mercy lets those places crash. And so finding that reconstruction was a poor, or my attempts at reconstruction were poor substitutes for ultimate redemption.
And Carrie, you've been on this process for a while. For those people who are just kind of getting into this work and starting to understand even their own structures of having a life that's filled with false Edens, needing to kind of deconstruct it or let it burn down, what would you say to those folks about their process, or kind of what's ahead of them, or even some encouragement for the freedom that comes on the other side, even though it's painful?
Well, quite obviously, I'd say get the book as a blueprint, because your book hit me at just the right time, and it has kind of hit me. I will go back to it 2 or 3 times, and I write all over my books, and I've turned up a bunch of pages from the bottom, which means come back and reflect on this, and from the top, which means something else to me. So I would direct people there, which might be obvious, but I loved where you started with getting people to name that all is not well, all is not right. Often that's obvious to us, and we might therefore pick up Redeeming Heartache as a title, thinking I would love some redemption in the heartache. But even people who are not naming the heartache, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of naming it, because this book brought me so much relief, just to name some of my own categories, to name beauty. But I think one of the things I got super excited about in the book that people will find relief in for themselves, whether they're already naming heartache or not, is both of your own spaces of honesty about your own failures. Because I know you both as strong people, good people I would follow. I know you both as leaders. But Cathy, you particularly went into some stories about a somewhat recent season for yourself of coming to the end of some strengths or facing the shadow side of some strengths and needing some respite and redirection and internally, I don't know what, like, I do know what language you'd put to it because I read it, but that will be such a gift to people and thinking about their own stories, because there's so much permission there to not be consistently and perfectly fabulous at the things that we are in fact really strong and beautiful in. And that was such a gift. I didn't know much of that about your story. And so to read that, just so much permission. But also, when you've written a book, as you both have and as I have, you bleed, you labor, there's just no worse torture and no much more fun at the same time somehow. So you have bled to produce this book. I was thinking about the book of the medium being the message, the fact that the two of you wrote it together with different gifts, with different voices. I think that called me as a reader, and will invite others to think about the necessity of collaboration, the necessity of bringing the priest, prophet, and king or queen together, not just internally, as you talk about, but in finding partners and collaborators with whatever we're called to do in the world. So that was beautiful. I've experienced that at the Allender Center in general, that your programming is both created in a way that includes all of those, structured in a way that feels safe, prophetic in a way that calls something forward, and priestly in just ministration to people. But as much as I had participated in programs there before, reading the book just is a different level, because I can engage it without the anxiety, frankly, that comes for me in being in group and being out of my milieu. I can sit under my weighted blanket on my couch with my whatever beverage and take in as much as I can for the moment. It's dense, and I'll keep going back over. And it hit me at a season of deconstruction, reconstruction, where I'm in a little bit of a sabbatical moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would love to hear, when you think of the categories of orphan and stranger and widow, what struck you, what captured you, what did you begin to see and look at? Because you're one of those folks that I look to and learn much from, but it's so honoring, and thank you for naming that we have offered something of goodness. But when you went through that process, what did you see that you had not seen before with those categories of trauma?
Well, I was interested in the fact that, of course, if we're to be like Jesus, we each would have elements of all three, where I tend to think of the ones I feel more comfortable with. Comfort being relative, because I hate the execution of a prophetic role in many ways. And but I also appreciated you giving language, as the Bible does, so not original probably, to the fact that no one really envies being a prophet. No one particularly wants to be one, and they usually are considered weird and strange and hated. So that was comforting. Actually,
start with that though. How do you see, and how have you lived already in that prophetic role?
Well, I really annoy people when I'm on a team. And I know we're meant to talk about the joy of what we can bring to the kingdom. I get that. But I annoy people when I'm on a team because I have all these ideas that are really weird. And I think they're great. I produce a lot of ideas. But if you're on a team, people say, just shut up. Every idea you come up with, somebody has to execute. We don't want to hear about more ideas. And that one's just not in the mainstream. And we're not going to probably get to that. And we're not going to really do that. On those tests where you say, word association, cat, most people say dog, and I would say burglar. I mean, I never come up with the thing that the team thinks of. So I'm annoying, but it means that I see things that everybody's not seeing. And I'm maybe the Andy Hardy character, or the older folks might remember that, let's put on a play today. I'm always coming up with, let's put on a show, let's do a thing. So I think I live that in a lot of ways. I don't know. I love calling forth things that are not as though they were, or I guess that's classic Abraham Roman statement, but to say, wouldn't it be great if, it's just part of the prophetic thing. I'm always coming up with ideas of things that we just have to do.
Well, and we build a strong case between the interplay of trauma as a stranger and something of the calling of the prophetic voice. So what have you come to understand more or different with regard to your own strangeness?
Well, certainly you use the language of, hell no, as long on my watch, hell no to whatever. For me, that would be somebody feeling left out, somebody knocking at the door and it not being opened, somebody not being welcomed in. So that certainly comes from my own story of feeling on the outside, or like I never fit, or was never the cool kid. And some of the cool kids have told me they thought I was one. So, doesn't really matter. I didn't think I was. And today I saw a bumper sticker that said, I used to be cool. And I wanted to pull up next to that person and say, how do you know? And I never was. So, wish we could talk back to bumper stickers, really. So I don't know. Does that answer that?
It's a lovely beginning to be, your world would have looked like you fit extremely well, but your sense was you didn't. And in that not fitting, it cost you immensely. Again, that's part of, as much as I'm thrilled to promote redeeming heartache, you're burning down the Fireproof Hotel. It's a powerful memoir narrative of something of, the frame of how you came to need to have this unburnable life. So I don't want you to have to go through your own book, other than to, in one sense, help the audience get a better sense of, you would have looked so much like you were very cool and fit very well, but you didn't. How come?
Man, I can't even wrap my brain around that, because I just, immediately thought of myself with braces and stubby pigtails and a dorky orange polyester outfit. I grew up in a family with a dad who was an alcoholic. He had quit drinking, but and never drank again. He made it 61 years without taking another drink, but didn't address the underlying issues. And there was a lot of hypervigilance required to be in that home. And I was scanning the horizon to keep my nose clean and stay safe. As I think I need you to restate the question, because even in that answering, I flood as I go back to thinking about what it felt like to be other.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think that's the power and also the terror of re-engaging these stories, right? Is that, even in a split second, we can be brought back to a flood of memories, a flood of emotions. And even, when we've been doing work, like you've been doing work for over a decade, if not longer than that, Carrie, on your own story. And yet here we are in a split second, it still feels like live wires. And it can flood the plane so quickly. And I think that's something amazing about our humanness, and also something that can be really intimidating around going back into story, because we know then inevitably when we step back in, it's still alive in us. Um, and so even for you to be willing to come on to a podcast or to keep engaging, and for your heart to be still tender enough to be able to be flooded, shows something of the work that you've done to dismantle the Fireproof Hotel. Because if you were still living in that bind, you wouldn't be so tender to the emotions and the reality of your story coming back in so quickly. Which is encouraging.
And thank you. Also, as I was doing some events, book tour kind of things around my own book, the first question always was, wow, how or why were you willing to be so vulnerable? I would not have put that out there. You were pretty honest. And I think that I've felt a calling that someone has to go first in a lot of settings. And that when we can show up and say, here's where I've suffered, but that's not the final word. Here's what I'm seeing God doing out of it, if imperfectly or if, haltingly, then someone else says, oh, maybe I can survive looking at my story. Maybe there's beauty to be had from the ashes.
Yeah. Do you find yourself still surprised when you're able to tap into it quickly?
Tap into which part?
Your story, the trauma, like when you felt the flood of emotions come back.
I don't find it surprising because it happens all day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yes, also you think, okay, I'm 61. I have done a lot of engaging of my story. Shouldn't I be past this? But I was thinking about how this year was so traumatic. I mean, obviously for so many of us collectively, and then also in my closest group of friends, my best friends have had a very high percentage of loss of their children, and our best friends have lost both of their children within 14 months this year. And so I have been hand in hand with grieving folks this year. And so at the end of the year, when we look back, I think I was framing it as, oh, what a hard year. Oh, what a hard year. But as I engaged your book, I was so encouraged to see, I am gifted to be with people in the deepest grief, and I can cry with people. And I also, and I hope that the timing and the proportion of on this are more good than bad. I also can say we're also going to have a dance party. Mm-hmm. And that was something this year with all of the grief, all of the hard stuff. My husband and I said, you know what people need more than anything? They need to dance it out. We just got enough words. And we kept saying somebody needs to have a 2020 hindsight dance party. So we had it. We got a band and we did a COVID safe, it's all over, but then we found out it's not really all over, dance party spread out in an appropriate way. But somehow to hold those two things in tension, the book helped me see how it wasn't just heartache was in the past and redemption is, either cause and effect. I've had heartache, now I will have redemption. No. So, to answer your question, every day, the swirl of, wow, I was just asked a question that wasn't even a really hard question and went back to feeling in my body like a 4-year-old, unable to remember the question, but able to, in one sense, reconnect to the two of you and keep moving, but also know that that's just normal. normal to hold both. Normal to sit with someone and just bawl our eyes out and then say, well, we got to dance for a minute. We got to move. We got to find the both end.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the problems I have with what I've spoken, which I won't take back, that you are beautifully odd. The dilemma is the way you live, I've looked at over many years and thought you're one of the most normal, gospel, kingdom driven human beings I know. So, in one sense, what I'd say is your life actually is more of what could be true. I can use the word should, but could be true on behalf of others. Like you have the ability to hear the Spirit, as I've said. I could almost tell stories that I've heard from you with regard to encounters with homeless men on the street, in one sense, not helping, but being part of redemptive process for both of you. And in that sense, I want to come back to that question of what has brought you to be so normal, gospel, but so unusual with regard to how, at least I'll say for me, how many of us live.
Well, I may not, I get your point, but I'm not sure I get the question. So maybe
that seems to be the case often when I
can you rephrase? You're saying what has brought me to that point?
Well, how can you be so normal and not so normal?
Well, I think it's important to pay attention to what gets repeated and what makes us cry. And I could not stop crying when I read in your book that the church is not at the forefront of coming alongside the stranger. And I mean, that just wiped me out. It was not a new thought at all, but just to see it in print and say, man, those are not the places where this is happening. And thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven is what we pray. And then we don't expect to be part of the answer to that. Or we forget that we are the answer to that. Or the method. So I think it feels normal to long for something totally different, but it's not always normal. That's where we're supposed to be, but we lock up in the fireproof buildings or stay safe or, oh man.
Yeah. Any stories coming to mind of, again, encounters you've had that brought you not only a sense of the privilege, but also a redemption that was for you as well as for others?
Well, this is a story of being not normal, I guess. I was heading downtown one day to the shelter where I'm involved, and about 2 hours before I was supposed to go, I just heard what I understood to be God's voice saying, there's a lady downtown that needs some shoes, and I want you to get her some. And I didn't really think that was that weird. I texted a friend more for accountability, and I said, hey, apparently there's a lady downtown that needs shoes. I'll be getting her some. Pray that I find her. So I took my credit card, which I wouldn't have otherwise needed, and my Metro subway card, and jumped on the subway. And when I got off, I started looking at everybody and thinking, checking everybody's feet out. Everybody looked fine. Got to the shelter, which is a men's shelter, and thought, well, I guess I misheard. Didn't run into any ladies. Now I'm early. What am I going to do here now? Stepped inside, and there was at the front desk, with the intake desk, a woman who was very bedraggled looking, really, really dirty hair, ripped up clothes. And she was saying to the men at the desk, are you sure there's not a single pair of women's shoes in this building? And I looked down, and she was barefoot. And I said, I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you. God told me to go get shoes for somebody. She was not even amazed. She said, okay, cool. Can we go to Walmart? But I was like, wait, do you understand? This is like really cool. Yeah. This is really cool.
This is exceptional.
This is exceptional. So this was for me. I mean, yes, she got some shoes. In the end, she convinced me she didn't need to convince me. I could tell she needed shampoo. I could tell she needed razors. She asked for those. She asked if we could buy some thong underwear that she had always wanted to try, and got a cute little orange dress and some purple grape juice and some animal crackers and some cigarettes. So she got all of that. And she said, "How much did you spend on me?" And I told her, and she said, "That's a lot." And I said, "You're worth it." And she said, "I am, aren't I?" As she stood up a little straighter. And as we went outside, I said, "Can I just say a little prayer together?" And she said, "Yeah." And we wrapped our arms around each other, and my hands are in her super dirty hair. And I'm thinking about God knowing every hair on our heads, and knowing her as a little sparrow downtown that needed help, and knowing me as a little sparrow uptown that needed to be involved in someone's life. And and she said, "This was mutually beneficial." And I thought, yeah, totally. Like, I'll never forget this in my entire life. And that is worth so much more than the price of these shoes and deodorant. But she said, "Yeah, well, you got me some stuff I needed, and I taught you how to speed shop the Walmart." And I said, "Yes, indeed. It was totally mutually beneficial." And as the light changed and I needed to leave, went across the crosswalk, I stopped mid-crosswalk and looked at her, and we screamed in unison towards each other, "I love you!" And I've never seen Jessica again. I don't know if I'll see Jessica again on this earth. I don't know why I was involved in that. I didn't call the social worker. I didn't solve bigger problems for her. But I was totally changed. And that is not a normal story. That is not a normal life. How do you make sense of that? It doesn't make sense.
Well, the courage to burn down what might be at one level a lovely edifice, to actually see created something of the majestic work of the kingdom of God. Again, it's where, if we're willing to lose our life, there is a life to be found and to be given. And, I've actually heard the Jessica story before, but it's like all good stories. Like, I could hear it 100 more times, and each time have my own incredulity or question, and then the sense of surprise that the Spirit delights in bringing us back to ourselves, but also on behalf of others. It is such a rich gift to have you with us, and I wish indeed more time and another day more time, other than to say thank you for being a reader of our work, but even more, a reader and a hearer of the work of the Spirit of God.
Well, what a privilege, and thank you for laboring, literally, to give birth to this, both of you. Somehow the image of that, you two in tandem, that doesn't all add up. But thank you for what you did to bring this into the world. And I do just so commend it to people. I will sit with it probably a couple more times going through it. And I'm grateful.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Loved it.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.